The conference room buzzed with the usual pre-flight chatter, pilots reviewing charts, navigators double-checking coordinates, and senior officers discussing weather patterns. Captain David Richardson stood near the window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, his mind already calculating alternate routes. He'd flown this route to Kandahar 100 times, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the tension in the air, or maybe it was just another day in a war that seemed to have no end. "Coffee, sir?" a quiet voice asked. David barely glanced up as a young woman in fatigues moved through the room with a pot of coffee, refilling cups with practiced efficiency. She was just another face in the endless rotation of support staff, or so he thought. But as she reached to pour his coffee, something caught his eye. On her right sleeve, partially hidden by her jacket, was a patch he hadn't seen in years. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers. His hand shot out, gently catching her wrist. "Where did you get that patch?" The room fell silent. The young woman, her name tag read Martinez, froze, her dark eyes widening with something that looked like fear, or maybe shame. "It was my brother's, sir," she said softly, trying to pull away. But David didn't let go. Not yet, because he knew that patch. He knew the story behind it. His mind raced back 7 years to a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. To a helicopter crash in the mountains of Afghanistan. To a young pilot named Carlos Martinez, who had stayed at the controls long enough for his crew to escape before the bird went down in flames. Carlos Martinez, David whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "He was your brother," Elena Martinez nodded, blinking back tears. "Yes, sir. He was." The other pilots were watching now, sensing that something significant was unfolding. David released her wrist and took a step back, his mind reeling. He'd carried the weight of that mission for 7 years. The guilt of being the aircraft commander who'd made the call that put Carlos's helicopter in harm's way. The survivor's guilt of watching a good man die while he lived. "I need to speak with you," David said, his voice rough. After the briefing, Lena shook her head quickly. "Sir, I'm just here to please," he interrupted. And the word came out more like a plea than an order. She hesitated, then nodded once before hurrying from the room, the coffee pot trembling in her hands. The briefing continued, but David couldn't focus. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Morgan, kept shooting him concerned glances, but David waved her off. All he could think about was Carlos, bright-eyed, 24 years old, with a laugh that could light up the darkest forward operating base. Carlos, who had talked endlessly about his little sister back home, who was studying to be a doctor. Carlos, who had died because David had made a tactical decision that, while technically sound, had cost a young man his life. When the briefing finally ended, David found Elena waiting in the hallway, her back straight despite the way her hands twisted together nervously. Up close, he could see the resemblance, the same determined set to her jaw, the same fierce intelligence in her eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Carlos said you were going to be a doctor." Lena's laugh was bitter. "I tried. I got through 2 years of medical school, but every time I walked into a hospital, all I could think about was how no doctor could save my brother. How he died alone in those mountains while I was safe at home, studying for exams." She looked down at the patch on her sleeve. "So I enlisted. Figured if I couldn't save lives like he did, at least I could serve like he did." "But you're serving coffee," David said, and immediately regretted how it sounded. "Because I washed out of flight school," Elena said, her voice cracking. "Panic attacks. Every time I got in a cockpit, I saw him burning. The instructors said I was too emotionally compromised. So now I serve coffee to the pilots who made it, while I wear my dead brother's patch and pretend I'm honoring his memory." David felt something break open inside his chest. "Elena," he said slowly, "Carlos didn't die because he wasn't good enough. He died because I sent him into a hot LZ when I should have called for more air support. I've lived with that decision every single day for 7 years." Elena looked up sharply. "You were the AC on that mission?" "I was. And I've wanted to find Carlos's family for years. To tell them how sorry I am, how brave he was, how he saved 6 lives that day by keeping that bird stable long enough for his crew to jump clear." David's voice shook. He was a hero, Elena, and you're his sister. That means you've got his blood, his courage, his heart. Tears streamed down Elena's face now. But I failed. I couldn't even— You didn't fail, David interrupted firmly. You're traumatized. There's a difference. And I'm going to help you if you'll let me. I know a therapist at Walter Reed who specializes in aviation-related PTSD. I know instructors who've worked with pilots who've been through worse. If you still want to fly, Elena, really want to fly? Because Carlos would want that. And because you deserve it. Elena stared at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. Why would you do this for me? Because I owe your brother a debt I can never repay, David said simply. But maybe I can help his sister finish what he started, spreading courage in the sky. 3 years later, Captain Elena Martinez stood on the tarmac, her hand resting on the hull of her own Black Hawk, on her sleeve. Her brother's patch had been joined by her pilot's wings. And watching from across the airfield, David Richardson smiled, finally feeling the weight he'd carried begin to lift. Sometimes redemption doesn't erase the past, but it can honor it. And sometimes the people we think we've failed become the very ones who save us. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that second chances exist and that courage, like love, never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to take flight again.